president of the ANC, Cyril Ramaphosa, will today be meeting with parties that are supporting Palestine. Ramaphosa had a similar meeting with parties that are sympathetic to Israel. But for more details on what things are looking like, certainly in the Middle East, we are joined now by SABC News correspondent Trent in Tel Aviv. Trent, good morning to you. I think let's talk a little bit about what the latest is coming out of the area. There are reports of the Israel bombardment continuing in Gaza last night. I mean, just how extensive is this bombardment from last night that we know about, and how bad is the impact on the ground?
Yeah, good morning, Naledi. That's right. I mean, we are receiving multiple reports of pretty heavy bombardment overnight across both the north and the south of the Gaza Strip. Palestinian media on the ground are reporting that the Jabalia refugee camp was struck once again. They say 90 people died within those strikes. We can't independently verify that, of course, because journalists are really not able to get into the Gaza Strip at the moment because the IDF is controlling the entry points. But certainly, according to the videos and the evidence being posted online, it's a pretty desperate situation. We also know that a children's hospital in the south of Gaza in Khan Yunis was struck, and we are hearing more about an operation which took place in the north of Gaza, again at a hospital where the IDF says it apprehended around 90 members of Hamas, including members that took part directly in the October 7th attack. They say they found ammunition stashes and weapons within the hospital, including in the maternity ward. But the Palestinians are saying that during that operation, the IDF again killed a number of civilians. We've not had any response to those accusations from the Israelis. But again, certainly across multiple sectors within that Gaza Strip, we're continuing to see very heavy combat and civilians being caught in the crosshairs.
And the likelihood of us seeing a ceasefire in the near future? I mean, we're also getting reports that Qatar is certainly trying to revive those talks.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Qatar has proved instrumental in the past in getting ceasefires up and running. Of course, they were really instrumental in negotiating the last one that we saw, which lasted 7 days. A lot of aid was able to get into Gaza, and a lot of those hostages were able to come home. We understand the head of Mossad, which is the main intelligence agency in Israel, has been speaking with the Prime Minister of Qatar with the approval of the Israeli government around trying to resurrect those ceasefire. Very early days, according to the Israelis, but at least the conversations are happening. Certainly many of the families in Israel with loved ones stuck in Gaza, those hostages, around 130 of them or so, are hoping that potentially this could provide an opening to get their loved ones home, particularly after those 3 Israelis were killed by the IDF in an accidental incident on Friday. That's really added to the despair and desperation, I suppose you could guess, for those families waiting to get their loved ones home.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about the numbers that we're looking at. I mean, you talk about that bombardment last night, 90 people, of course, unable to confirm that number. But where are we sitting right now with the number of journalists that have been killed in this violence?
Yeah, I mean, again, Palestinian sources on the ground are saying close to 100 journalists have been killed in this conflict. Most recently, a cameraman from the Al Jazeera media network was killed. He was buried over the weekend. The correspondent he was working with was also seriously injured, but has continued to report, saying that he believes it's his duty to report on the ground there, given, as I say, independent journalists from the outside world really can't get in to Gaza right now, both because Israel won't really let them in from their side, but also I have to say the Egyptians are not really letting journalists in from the Egyptian side at the Rafah crossing either. So look, obviously a very deadly time for press on the ground, but they do continue to work there, and really they are the eyes and the ears of the world right now in the Gaza Strip, and are helping journalists like me and others who are not down 80 kilometres that way in Gaza, are helping us try and get the information we need from on the ground to be able to try and work out exactly what is happening.
And you talk about that journalist, that Al Jazeera journalist, that there being Samir Abu Daqqa killed in an Israeli attack in Gaza. And as a result of that, we're hearing then that the news agency Al Jazeera says it will file a case against Israel at the International Criminal Court. Has there been any response to that? Any developments?
Look, we haven't had any official development yet or response from the IDF on that one. I mean, they say that they are not deliberately targeting journalists, but yes, are stressing that it's an active combat zone, and anyone operating in that area is at risk of being caught up in the combat. They say that they are still having heavy clashes with Hamas and are stressing to people to try and steer clear of those areas. But I mean, the difficulty is we're not talking about a very large area at all here in terms of land mass, and so there's really not many places people can go in order to try and keep safe. I mean, the north, the south, the central part of Gaza now are effectively all combat zones. So look, an incredibly difficult situation, but the IDF and the Israeli government say that they're not really going to slow down the tempo here. They say their goal is to eradicate Hamas and to bring all of their hostages home, and they're going to maintain the tempo of their operations until they achieve those goals.
Yeah, all right, let's leave it there, Trent. Thank you so much for keeping us updated. That there, our correspondent speaking to us from Tel Aviv, Trent Murray. But let's take this story forward now, and for that we speak with SABC News International Editor Sophie Mokoena, who joins me here in studio this morning. Sophie, a good morning to you. And if you know, we've just spoken to Trent, obviously, and one of the things that he's touched on is just the levels of continuing violence against reporters and journalists there in Gaza. Work being done here as well by the ANC president, it seems.
Yes, indeed, the ANC president today is expected to meet with the parties that are supporting the Palestinians or who are for the Palestinian cause. You know that he had a similar meeting with those who are sympathetic to Israel, among them the two main groups, that is the South African Jewish Board of Deputies and also the South African Zionist Federation. And after the meeting, they did release a statement, the South African Jewish Board of Deputies, saying that the discussions were quite fruitful, but at the end of the day, the common ground or point is that they agree that there must be a two-state solution. But when you look at what the Prime Minister of Israel has said, Benjamin Netanyahu, now this weekend, he said he has been the one who has been fighting very hard to ensure that the issue of this two-state solution is not implemented. He is pushing that there shouldn't be a two-state solution. And therefore you ask yourself, if these two organizations in South Africa are saying they do agree with the South African government that there must be a two-state solution, and the man who is responsible, who's in charge of Israel, who's leading Israel, even though he is embattled right now, saying that no two-state solution. And therefore this is a difficult one. And therefore the meeting today, we will hear what the president of the ANC will say after meeting with these groups that will be there supporting Palestine. But we know the ANC position in terms of its international relations and foreign policy is that they do support the Palestinians, the Palestinian cause. You know that this dates back to exile years, including the former leaders of the ANC, among them President Nelson Mandela, then Mbeki, Zuma, the deputy president Kgalema Motlanthe, and the current president Ramaphosa. The ANC has been firmly in support of the Palestinian cause.
Yeah. Is there perhaps a concern in your view that as we enter into the festive season and so many of us, you know, really start to slow down in our productivity? The bombardments certainly aren't slowing down in Gaza. We heard Trent Murray talking about the concerning numbers there of approximately 90 people over just one night, right? Do you think that there's a concern from President Ramaphosa that seemingly he needs to be seen to be doing something even as things slow down here?
I think you are correct, Naledi. As people are going with their business, going to holidays, and we know that the Middle East, you know, there are seasonal stories. This is one story at this time where you have all these problems, and therefore, unfortunately, this time around, at a time where there's this huge confrontation and fighting in Gaza, and therefore people are beginning to look away. But fortunately, the media is not doing that. As you heard earlier on, so many journalists have died, and some people are saying the numbers surpass any other conflict that has been there before in terms of the lives of journalists who have died in a conflict zone.
Yeah.
And therefore, journalists are still there. That is why we are still here, and we will continue to be here even today, later today. Absolutely. At the Security Council, that meeting, Shawan will be monitoring that meeting. We have Trent in Israel, and we'll continue to get the side of the Palestinians as well.
Yeah, can we talk a little bit about political parties here in South Africa, right? I mean, you talk about the ANC being very vocal about its support for Palestine. We've seen the likes of parties like the Economic Freedom Fighters sharing the same sentiment. Do you think that this in any way will impact what happens in the national elections next year? The positions that political parties take in the Israel and Hamas war?
You know, Naledi, no doubt that will have a huge impact. Let's take a province like Western Cape. You see the numbers of people who are participating during the protests. And their message is clear. Those who have been out there supporting Palestine, those are huge numbers. The question is, as they are now supporting Palestine, and in this country, being the citizens of this country who are sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, come next year, in terms of when they talk about, because elections are not only about South African issues, it is also about the foreign policy of any party that wants to be in government. How are you going to interact with big questions around the world? Because South Africa is not an island. And therefore, that matter is definitely going to come to play. And also, when you look at countries such as the United States of America, that is why President Joe Biden is worried, because the more this war continues, there are chances that he is going to lose support of those people in the United States of America who are sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. And therefore, those countries that are playing a prominent role at the international stage have to take this into consideration. Yeah. If you are a country that has no voice or that is not so prominent on international stage, you can rest. But a country like South Africa that has positioned itself as a formidable and a powerful voice of the South at the global stage, you are always going to be caught in these issues. And those issues will play themselves even in your own country. And therefore, I'm sure political parties are really thinking very hard, because you can't sideline that huge vote. That's a huge vote. That's a huge vote also that can contribute to the outcome of the elections. And I'm sure those political parties in South Africa are thinking as to what to do with this Middle East question.
Yeah, it certainly is interesting to see the trickle-down effect of that Israel-Hamas war and how it's impacting and could possibly shape our own politics here. But SABC International News Editor Sophie Mokoena, thank you so much for your time.